Hi, everyone. Steve Adubato. You do not have to be a New York, New Jersey Giant fan to appreciate it. Yes, they play in the Meadowlands, but they are the New York Giants, and we have someone who knows more about the Giants, more about football, more about sports than most people you know. He is Gary Myers. He's author of this book, Once a Giant, a story of victory, tragedy, and life after football. Gary, in fact, has worked with the New York Daily News, HBO Sports, 7 books on sports. Good to see you, my friend. How you doing, Gary?
I'm doing great, Steve. How you doing?
Good. Listen, I'm a long-suffering Giant fan, right? We are taping this as other teams are playing in the playoffs. It'll be seen later in 2024. Question, once a Giant, what does it mean?
Well, first of all, you can't be that long suffering. They've won 4 Super Bowls.
It's been a while, but go ahead.
All right. Well, once a Giant means obviously play off their name, but also the fact that these guys are now in their 50s and 60s, and they were once looked upon as these superheroes, giants of men. And now, at this point in their lives, facing the challenges that football has presented to them, both physically, emotionally, and financially. My book really tells the story of what life is like for them after football.
Yeah, let's go through some of these folks. And by the way, let's remind folks the 2 Giant Super Bowls were in 1990. And what was the other year?
Well, 1990, 1986.
86.
2007,
Oh,
2011.
yeah, I forgot.
Yeah, forgot. It's only like 10 years ago. Come on.
No, no, trust me, it's getting longer. Let's go through some of these Giants. Somebody who I've interviewed, been honored to interview many times, Harry Carson, a real leader, a terrific football player, but an even better person. Talk about Harry Carson, particularly life after football.
Steve, he's one of the greatest leaders in sports I've ever come across in 40 years covering the NFL. He was the go-to guy for Bill Parcells in the locker room. That if something was going wrong, he'd go to Harry, then to George Martin and Phil Simms, but mainly Harry. He'd say, hey, Harry, go fix it. Harry's taken that leadership, and 37 years after this championship, he really considers himself the captain for life of those Giant teams, and he's so well respected that even players around the league, current players and former players who played in the generation that he played, still lean on him and call him for advice, and he's always there for them. And if one of these players has a problem and a teammate finds out about it, the first call is usually to Harry, who basically rounds up the troops, on text messages or calls them, and they come in to the aid of a teammate in need. And I think it's just very unusual.
And they're connected to each other in very meaningful ways, which is very rare in professional sports. But someone who has struggled, obviously, if anyone follows the news, and you don't have to be a football fan or a Giant fan, Lawrence Taylor, LT, struggled with drugs and alcohol. He's been very upfront about that. He's had arrests. He was a registered, he in fact is a registered sex offender after soliciting underage prostitute in 2011 in New York. LT, greatest defensive football player of all time, post-career. Talk about Lawrence Taylor.
Well, I worked from the most recent backwards. I met with him in the spring in Florida in 2022. And Steve, really, and I've known him since 1981. I've seen him several times since he retired. He looked healthier and happier to me than at any point since he had retired. He claims he hasn't done drugs since 1998 rather, when he got out of the last time he went to rehab. Teammates have backed that up. Now, he's had many problems since then, but not drug related. And, quite frankly, I was happy to see him in the frame of mind that he was in it that day, because I know him as being a really good guy. And the troubles that he's caused, both for himself and more importantly for others, is, inexcusable, unimaginable. But he doesn't walk away from it. He takes responsibility for it. And it looks to me, with a guy who, these drug addicts are always recovering. They're never cured. And I think he's come to grips with that, and it's day to day. And, I'm just hoping for good things for him. and not seeing his name in the news for bad reasons. Any day, a day that goes by and you don't see Lawrence Taylor, for bad stuff in the newspaper, that's a good day for him.
It is. There's someone else, or there's a theme in the book that is so important. For those of us who are football fans, in all candor, there are times that I actually feel guilty watching football. And when I say that, yeah, I love the sport. But when I see what has happened to so many football players in terms of brain injuries that have destroyed, that have had a devastating impact on their lives, one of the players you talk about here in the book, by the way, the book is Once a Giant. The author is Gary Myers. He's the best. Go out and get this book. Check it out. It's Brad Benson, an offensive lineman.
Yeah, Brad Benson was, he kind of typified the blue collar mentality of the team, played such a key role at left tackle, but his life after football has been very difficult. Has had, you name the body part, and he's had surgery on it. Carl Banks kids him and calls him Mr. Potato Head because different body parts have been replaced. But obviously, it's no laughing matter, and the players feel, their hearts go out to him that so many things have gone wrong for Brad since he retired. And, that's, many, many years ago. He's had financial issues. Harry Carson, who we talked about, created a GoFundMe page for Brad. And I know players are very concerned about him.
We're going to do another segment on Bill Parcells with one of your colleagues who wrote the book Parcells. You know the book. Bill Parcells, I'm a student of leadership, as you know, Gary. I'm fascinated by different styles of leadership. In that interview about Bill Parcells, we'll talk about his leadership. But Once a Giant, Bill Parcells, to what degree is Bill Parcells, who's a very private man, to what degree is Bill Parcells, who was the head coach for the Giants, these Super Bowls, to what degree is he still connected to, quote, his players?
In many ways, and a couple of them even fascinating, Steve, for a guy who had a love-hate relationship with players because he drove them so hard, and half the time they loved him and half the time they hated him. But today, the relationship is much different. He's like a compassionate grandfather.
Bill Parcells?
Yeah, in many ways.
I wish we had the video of him, HBO, of him just screaming and yelling.
Yeah.
The video on the sidelines.
Yeah.
And not to mention the stuff he used to say to Phil Simms, the quarterback. What kind of grandfather? Seriously?
Compassionate. To the point.
Explain that to us.
Okay. To the point, I know it's hard to believe. To the point that many of these players call him or send him cards on Father's Day, call him or send him cards on his birthday every year. Bill, and this story was so good that I couldn't hold it like for the middle of the book because I wanted to draw people into it. But over the years, he's given a total of $4 million without any expectation of being repaid to about 20 of his former players. Now, a total of $4 million, which is still a lot of money. A lot of people are confused and said, oh, $4 million to every player. Well, he's compassionate, but not that compassionate. But $4 million is an incredible amount of money. Now, his feeling is that these players sacrifice so much for him and to help make them champions and help Bill become who he is today, a Hall of Fame coach who won a couple of Super Bowls.
An icon, a legend.
Yeah, and totally financially secure to the point that he's put money away for his 3 daughters. He's given money to his ex-wife. He's put money away that he feels he needs to live the rest of his life. And the rest he has, in a pile that he considers for his friends. And it's not like any player can call him up and say, Bill, I need money to build an addition onto my house. That gets rejected right away. But players will call him up and say, I'm having trouble paying the mortgage, or having trouble paying my taxes, or lawyer fees, or medical bills. Medical bills probably the most important because the health insurance that the league supplied for them ran out after a year and a half. Now it's 5 years, but back in those days, a year and a half. And Steve, it's just so totally insufficient. Most of the health problems these guys incur happen in their lives when they're 50, when mid-50s, mid-60s, when they're having knee and hip and shoulder replacements. And if they don't have good insurance through jobs after football, this stuff is overwhelming. So Bill is trying to help him out in that regard. So if that's not a compassionate guy who is, people don't know these stories, still have the image of Bill as that hard-driving coach yelling at Phil Simms on the sidelines, yelling at Bill Belichick on the sidelines.
That's one of his assistant coaches.
Yeah, I mean, people who only have that image, have that in their mind, were shocked to learn some of these stories about Bill.
Before I let you go, Gary, let me ask you something.
Yeah.
For those of us who are Giant fans today, and even who there are superstars who we feel connected to, and as we do this program, Saquon Barkley, I'm a huge fan of Barkley's. We don't know what's going to happen with him, so we're taping this in the latter part of January 2024. Here's my question. Once a Giant, for those guys who played back then, once a Giant, is it still the same, or is it here today, gone tomorrow? You know what I'm saying? They're not really once a Giant anymore. That tradition doesn't exist.
Well, yeah, I mean, free agency has totally changed it. It's very rare that the player plays his entire career with the same team. But, Steve, what I think I really think once a Giant should be required reading, and I'm not talking about book sales. I'm saying I think it should be required reading for the life lesson, required reading for every player in the NFL today, because of the life lessons they can learn what's happened to these guys. And unless they're careful, the same thing can happen to them, both financially and physically.
So it's also about friendship and loyalty and staying connected through tough times. Once a Giant, the author is Gary Myers. Gary, thank you, my friend. We appreciate it. Wish you all the best.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
You got it. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Life is full of changes. At Hackensack Meridian Medical Group, we're ready for them. If you have a cold or chronic illness, our 5-star doctors can treat any ailment. Whether you're starting recess or retirement, we're prepared with pediatric and adult specialists. And if you just moved here, we are in your neighborhood. You now have access to a health team 1,000 strong. So no matter what or when, we're ready.